All right, good morning all. It's 9:31, so I figured I may as well call to order the first ever joint meeting of the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management and the Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee. We have, there's 13 members of our committee, so quorum's 7, so we're good to go. I'll just ask Chris to start us off with, I know there's a couple councillors that couldn't make it today, including my counterpart chair, Councillor Chantieri, but I'll just ask Chris to do a quick roll call.
Happy to do so, Chair. Councillor Brockington.
Good morning.
Councillor Cloutier. I saw Councillor Cloutier earlier. There he is.
Yeah, present. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Councillor Darouz. I believe Councillor Darouz is having difficulty joining this morning, having technical issues. Councillor Eglai.
Here.
Oh, excellent. Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor King.
Here.
Councillor McKinney.
Here.
And Councillor Meehan.
Here.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Kitts.
Here.
And Vice Chair Menard.
Morning.
You have quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. As I mentioned, Councillor El Chantieri is not able to make it, so it's just me as chair today. And to Councillor Darouz, if you can hear us, Jeff and I have already talked about trying to host some sort of joint meeting with IT subcommittee that's going to guarantee, I think it's between Agricultural Affairs and IT subcommittee, to guarantee rural internet service improvements. So Jeff and I are working on that. We just have to, blackmail Bell and Rogers to be better. Okay, so we'll move on to a declaration of interest. Does any of you guys have a ditch? Because that would, if you want to fill it, that could fall into that old declaration of interest situation. Anyway, so seeing none. So we have one item on the agenda today, and it's an item that's near and dear to my heart, the ditch alteration policy update. I believe we have Stephen Clark, not that Stephen Clark. We have Stephen Clark here to present to us today to give us an update on where we're at with this policy. It's a long history, all the way back to 2003, even pre-amalgamation to some degree. Oh, there's no chair. There's no one in this chair, so I'll just present myself. Oh, there he is. It's the wrong screen.
Thank you, chairs. Can I put the presentation up? Thank you. Hello, good morning. My name is Stephen Clark. I'm the program manager in the Planning, Real Estate, and Economic Development Department in the Business and Technical Support Services. Before I begin, I just wanted to give a big thank you for all the time and excellent work that's been put in by the project team for the ditch alteration policy update. This project's involved multiple departments across the city and has led to an increased cooperation and communication with respect to our city ditches. Next slide, please. In October 2016, staff were directed to update the ditch alteration policy. The ditch alteration is a form of local improvement, so staff began by updating the local improvement policy. The local improvement policy was approved in November 2021. The project team then turned their full attention to updating the ditch alteration policy. The project team consisted of planning, real estate, economic development, public works, infrastructure, water services, and emergency and protective services. A consultant was then hired to complete a municipal scan and a third-party review. The consultant provided 3 technical memos that built on one another and together pointed towards strategies that the city could enable to manage their ditch alterations more efficiently and effectively as part of the integrated stormwater management system. The first tech memo was the ditch functions and impacts of ditch alterations. It reviewed ditch functions and the current policy and impacts of alterations. The second technical memo was the ditch alteration policy consistency review. The consultant reviewed our alignment with other city plans and policies, as well as the federal and provincial legislation. The third memo, or technical memo, was ditch alteration business process review, which provided a SWOT analysis and recommendations to revise the policy and mechanisms for monitoring, enforcement, and cost recovery. Lastly, the consultant provided an executive summary that summarized all three of the technical memos. All of these are attached as supporting documentations to the report. Next slide, please. Based on federal and provincial legislation, the updates to the policy was limited. However, the city was still able to address some concerns that were heard. The updated policy allows residents to alter their ditch through two means: a local improvement application or a development agreement process. The local improvement request would follow an established process requiring financial commitment from 2/3 of the benefiting properties. For this method, the city would bear the upfront costs prior to approval and be reimbursed once complete. The development agreement would allow ditch alterations to be applied by a single entity. The upfront cost would be on the applicant prior to approval, and then the city would be obligated to manage construction activities like a developer would when building a new development. There are no additional financial impacts to the city with the proposed update to this policy. Next slide, please. In addition to updating the policy, the city also provided an update to ottawa.ca for additional education on the importance and functions of ditches, how to contact the city for questions or concerns, and maintenance responsibilities which are shared between the city and residents. Public Works has also created a social media infographic that will be shared during the spring and fall. Roles and responsibilities have been further defined for all departments that deal with ditches in the city. The current city ditch maintenance and reinstatement operations are not changing due to this report. And staff reaffirm the enforcement process for ditch alterations and investigations through a stepped approach. Alterations without city approval can be enforced through the use and care bylaw, site alteration bylaw, or property standards. There are no changes proposed with respect to enforcement on the existing bylaws. If enforcement was to occur, the city will typically verbally discuss this with the property owner. If no action is taken, the city would then issue a verbal warning to reinstate the ditch. And if no action has been taken by the property owner, the city inspector would issue a notice of violation with a deadline for the ditch reinstatement. Ultimately, if there was still no action taken, the city would reinstate the ditch at the cost to the resident, and it would be added to their property owner's tax bill. Next slide, please.
All right, thanks, Steve. So we have a couple delegations here, so we're going to go to our delegations first, then we'll come back to questions to staff. They both appear to be from the Carleton Heights and Area Residents Association. I know Councillor Brock did host today a standalone meeting as a part of the consultation on this with this community. So our first speaker is Elizabeth Costello.
Okay, I'm just waiting for my presentation to come up.
We have it, so we'll put it up as soon as.
Okay, I have it. Here we go. Okay, good morning, councillors. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join you from the Carleton Heights and Area Residents Association. Can you see the PowerPoint? Yes? Okay. So Carleton Heights is, it's just south of the experimental farm, bound by Fisher Avenue generally and the Rideau River. And we have major streams buried underneath our homes that have been found by people when they do development, and often when they excavate, they find this flowing water, and we have active sump pumps clearing basements. So water is an issue in our area. We're characterized by narrow streets with no permanent on-street parking, no sidewalks, and degrading boulevards. Bus routes have been running less frequently or canceled, and we have aging infrastructure, including ditches, culverts, and catch basins that are now reaching 72 years old. And in fact, they've had little or no maintenance, while spring thaws and heavy rain events have been more problematic over the years. So in fact, our secondary plan was based on a 2-year detailed study and to limit development based on the infrastructure capacity limits and flooding problems going way back when, and still our facilities have had little to no maintenance. We know climate change has exacerbated issues. We are getting more significant rainfall events through multiple seasons, spring thaws, and very large events can lead to sheet flooding, which introduces new risks. And with more development, there are increasingly hard surfaces that limit surface drainage. And so in fact, the original design from 1950 may not be enough, and culverts may need to be enlarged to really manage water in our areas. So if you look at ditches, culverts, and catch basins and what they should look like, here's just from New Brunswick. It's a 32-foot wide road, which is much wider with a very established shoulder, paved and unpaved, and a gradual swale. This is not what we have. We in fact have ditches, culverts, and catch basins that are very interdependent, and it's important to remember they're interdependent for water to flow. There has to be a positive grade. It's just gravity helps the water go through. And if there isn't a positive grade, and as capacity is reduced with added sediment and soil and silt washing in and not washing out, we've got flows interrupted and drainage delayed, overflows, standing water, and urban stormwater ponds. So culverts have heaved through freeze-thaw cycles, and we've had increasingly loss of ditch function. So you can see here that flow rates have decreased with water remaining for longer durations. We've have flow routes losing integrity with the erosion and the heaving of culverts. And in fact, we've got impromptu urban stormwater ponds occurring in our neighborhood. And we've used the process proposed with this policy. We've had standing water in neighboring lots where residents have called 311. And in fact, it did nothing. And the site plan control for a new development pinned the plan for the new ditch to a shallow ditch, which would leave neighbors with standing water. When escalated, it caused more problems where city officials said construction, it would be dealt with after construction, and only through escalation was it resolved. And we can go into more detail in Q&A if you like. We're very disappointed that the policy didn't include any of our recommendations from residents and any of our concerns, because we really were engaged with multiple departments. And in fact, we think citywide requirements are part of the solution that are missing here. And in fact, it's entrenching silos. We need recommendations that require a systematic approach to measuring elevation profiles and ensuring positive grades. So we asked councillors to delay this ditch policy update to look at a systems approach that necessarily de-silos this approach and this policy and includes a solution that builds communities and not stresses them, overburdening developers, residents, and 311 with added stress and cost. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Costello. We have a question for you from your councillor, Councillor Rockington.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to you, Ms. Costello. Thank you for your presentation. Excellent, as usual. I just want to ask you about some of the challenges that Cortland Park has experienced with infill developments. You alluded to this in your presentation, the challenges of what has happened to the existing ditches when infill has come in and how that's impacted the community. Can you just expand that thought, please?
Yes. So what happens when, soil and sediment, shallow a ditch, and, with spring thaw, culvert, you've got the, freezing from winter and the thaw and the freeze, the thaw, the freeze, the thaw, the culvert raises. So in fact, you get a seesaw approach from interconnected ditches and culverts where water gets interrupted. It just can't seem to flow, right? So if you have one lot So we had a neighbor that had a lot next to it that had shallowed, so that this particular neighbor had standing water that was problematic, continuously problematic in his yard. In 2016, called 311, said there's a problem here. How do we resolve this? Then a developer came in for new homes to be built next door, and the planners directed the builder to set the ditch to the shallowed level, right? So in fact, the new development, driveways, ditches, culverts, all of this would have been set at the wrong level, leaving standing water in neighboring yards. So, we had to really escalate and help these residents and the infill project had to be halted so that the ditches could be restored. Then they were restored at a very dangerous level, like with very steep sides, and they had to be done again. So the process, this siloed approach to the process with this policy is not going to work. It's going to entrench silos and not encourage the collaboration and the system-wide, even community-wide approach that is costing resident time and money, developer time and money, and ultimately the city time and money.
Thank you. Yep, thank you. And just a different question with your set of recommendations. So you don't think your proposal is sort of to go back and as you say, a systems approach. Can you just expand on what you're recommending today so everyone on the committee can fully understand?
So we really need an approach that looks at communities, at neighborhoods. So we need departments in the city to work together, and we need communities to work with the city so that you're looking at elevations across the community, not just one lot, not just one street. But we want to make sure the elevation has a positive grade across the neighborhood so the water can flow out, right, to the river where it's supposed to go, and that culverts have the right capacities. So in fact, it was, this might explain it a little bit better here. We recommend that surveying ditch, road, and property elevations and measuring culvert and catch basin capacities are key to this. So we need the standards to be set, and we need it to be looked at like a system. And in fact, there's just too many departments you can see involved in making these decisions. So we need to break down the silos with this policy and begin responding to a community-based need that will end up saving everyone time and money, and particularly 311. Instead of looking at it as a point solution and blaming a lot problem. It's not a lot problem, it's a community problem.
Fair enough. Thank you, Ms. Costello, for your presentation and effort on this file. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, you had the 2016 versus 2018. The 2018 picture, was that just a tile laid underneath River Rock?
Now, my colleague will be here.
Okay, no worries.
But yes, this is the it wasn't resolved as of.
It's okay, I can ask.
Yeah,
I can ask when your colleague presents. It's okay. Thank you.
I could step in.
It's okay. I don't want to get away from deviate from the normal structure that we have. So it's fine. I can ask. We can talk about it.
Well, in the end, it was in 2018. It took over 2 years for it to resolve. The short answer to your question.
Councillor Egley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Elizabeth, for your presentation. I have a number of areas that also have ditches, and just so I completely understand, what I understand you just saying is you can't fix or deal with this lot by lot, but if you're going to make change, it has to be down the whole street in order to have that connectivity that you referred to. Well,
and in fact, we have engineers in the neighborhood and PhDs that work in these areas, and they say you have to go to the highest elevation in the neighborhood and survey. And the great thing is that the equipment has changed over time, and apparently the city has the GPS equipment needed. And it's, for the areas that have ditches, it would be just a few days of work to do these surveys of the different elevations to know what we need and what we're working with. So yes, we need to look at it in, if you think of it as a neighborhood that relies on this network, right? So, yeah.
And I think that's a fair comment. I've certainly seen situations in my ward where one house is addressed and then 2 houses down there's a problem, and it just moves the problem rather than necessarily fixing the problem. The staff presentation did refer to, and you listened to that and you've looked at the report quite closely. The staff presentation, I'll be asking staff about this, talked about the need to have neighbor buy-in. What does that mean to you? How far do you think that buy-in should go? Should that go to the person who lives next door to you? Should that go to everybody on your side of the street? Should that go to everybody on the street? What do you think works in that regard?
Well, the reality is there's been no maintenance over 72 years. So this is a problem that, really it's an FTE and budget problem for maintenance that is not being addressed. So it shouldn't be dealt with for a developer shouldn't have to solve all these problems. But to answer your question directly, we need to look at the system, right? So the water flows with gravity's help down the street and around to the next street. And, it's actually centering into one spot in our neighborhood. And we're actually even finding that neighboring neighborhoods are being affected and backing up into our neighborhood as well. So, this isn't just, a development's coming in, let's notify the neighbors. To me, that's too late. We've been identifying this problem for years now. And this isn't a lot of investment to solve a problem with data. So let's get the data on the problems with the elevations and the lack of maintenance, and let's solve this before a developer comes in and tries to, patchwork one lot at a time.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's all I have for now, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Gower.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentation, Elizabeth. It was well put together. I was curious, in your community, obviously you're very engaged, and there's some neighbors who have been involved in this process and the consultation who are very aware of the issues relating to ditch alteration. In general, though, in your neighborhood, how much awareness do you think there is amongst your neighbors as to what you should and should not be doing when it comes to altering your property in a way that might affect the ditches there?
Well, I think we've had a very high engagement over the last 2 years. And I think what's really scary about this, and it's a bit draconian, is that, people are fearful that, they're going to get $100,000 fine and they're going to have their front lawns dug up and re-ditched to really steep, dangerous levels, which is what we've seen recently. We do feel the city has a responsibility to ditches that have not been maintained over 72 years. And so to have one, we're really starting to talk about long-term affordability of housing, whether it's your insurance after a flood occurs, or if it's solving a ditch with a really big expense. So, we think that there's a community-based solution here that could be shared. Like the lead pipe replacements, what if we looked at drainage from backyards to front yards and drainage through the community, and we start looking at shared solutions instead of these really big expenses that, hurt developers, hurt us, hurt the city. And, just overburdening enforcement is not the way to go, or leaving standing water is not the way to go either. So does that answer your question?
Well, I think so. Maybe another follow-up would be, how could the city be communicating better with residents? I know there's information on the website, but do you have any other suggestions on how the city could be engaging more with your neighbors?
We need to break down the silos, and we need to begin talking about solutions instead of enforcement. So let's talk about what the solution is and how we work together with different city departments to create a system that works. We're avoiding the problem of standing water and drainage issues and crisis management instead of being preventative and working together across departments. This point solutions are really just entrenching silos and causing longer term problems and affordability issues and expenses to the city.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Just a question for committee. We have two delegations from the exact same community, and it looks like their presentations likely might go together. Did you want to hold off on some more questions just to Ms. Costello and then actually hear from Ms. Anderson? And if we have questions, we can keep Elizabeth both here so that we can just do questions and then they can choose who answers. Is that easier for everyone, just so that we don't end up going through it all together?
Sure.
Okay, so keep your hands up, Caroline, Catherine, and Jean, and Teresa too. And then we'll hear from Elizabeth Anderson, and then we'll come back to questions for both because they're the only two delegations.
Okay, I'm going to try and share my screen now. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to clean this up just a little bit if you'll bear with me. All right, is everything okay?
That's good. That's perfect.
Okay, I'm just going to go back to the beginning. All right, I'm here to provide some different context to the things that Elizabeth Costello has already brought to your attention. So I'm also talking about Chara. I'm going to be speaking mostly to Cortlandt Park, which is these two little areas in yellow, which sort of straddle Prince of Wales Drive just to the south of Baseline and Heron Roads. And they are the main area where we still have ditches. Just a reminder that we're mostly here because of the new OP and its impact on our neighborhoods, many of which Elizabeth spoke to. And one of the rationales for intensification was that existing neighborhoods already have the services and infrastructure, but we don't have all those services and infrastructure that we need. We're going to be talking to the gap in stormwater management today. I'll bring forward once again the 1973 study that formed the basis of our secondary plan, where it was determined that the areas marked as LD for low density, shown in this little hand-drawn map, were inappropriate for medium to high density redevelopment because they lacked the stormwater management infrastructure to successfully support it. Fast forwarding to 2022, the sewers and ditches and so on have not been rebuilt. The city can't even find the original engineering reports, but is now claiming that the sewers no longer need rebuilding. That's an assumption. It might be valid, but it's not an evidence-based conclusion. And if that assumption is false, then we could have infrastructure that's breaking and harming our health and welfare in our neighborhoods. So focusing in on the ditch systems, of course, which is what we're here for. In Cortlandt Park, our ditches are 72 years old. City engineer told me that the lifespan of a ditch system is 70 years, and yet we're only being presented with user pay options to residents of a system that has clearly reached the end of its lifespan. And what I mean by that is loss of functionality. We have ditches that have filled in naturally, culverts that have heaved, private culverts that have heaved, public culverts that have heaved, culverts and catch basins that have been buried by slow infill into the ditches, some of which are disintegrating and at risk of catastrophic failure under our streets, and sinkholes associated with loss of positive drainage occurring along major sections of the ditch system. We've started to get some restoration work done, but only because we've made such pests of ourselves. We show up at all the meetings, we write letters, and we are getting some response, but we're really concerned because the restorations that have occurred to date have left some of our ditches both less safe and more unstable. And this is a failure, and it's starting to feel like a refusal by city officials to apply the city's own written standards for ditch safety and functioning to our ditches, which would resolve all our issues. But the claim is that these standards do not need to be applied to old ditches. This feels like a double standard that is discriminatory to our health and safety to us. So let's put some detail on this. What we feel is that the ditch alteration policy, it's actually a really good policy. We like it as far as it goes, but what concerns us is not what's in it. What concerns us is the gaps. What is missing from the systems approach that Elizabeth was trying to bring up was the need for budget, manpower, for routine ditch inspection, maintenance, and repair, the need for ditch functioning standards as to positive grade, ditch depth, culvert functioning, et cetera, to ensure that ditch function is maintained over time, and the need for ditch safety standards and safety needs to be prioritized over other considerations when deciding whether to preserve, replace, or even modify a ditch. And just to show you what happens when that doesn't happen, I'm showing a picture on the left of a before picture where we had a ditch system that had become a flood risk because the ditch was filled in and had buried a culvert. You can't see it here if you can see where I'm pointing with my cursor. The culverts running across the street here and across the street here were about to fail, which would have caused catastrophic flooding in the neighborhood. So we finally got the city to do something about it. But what they did was they replaced our flood risk with a public safety hazard. So the restored ditch is 4 feet deep. It's got a 1-to-1 degree slope. The slope starts too close to the pavement, which you can see here, and there's the beginnings of some erosion on the side of it. So it's so steep that it's also unstable. It's a rollover risk for cars and a fall risk to people. And the picture I showed you before was taken in 2021. Now in 2022, there's a little grass growing here, but what I want you to notice is that the ditch is eroding backwards towards one street and eroding sideways towards the other street. The dirt is washing into the ditch, filling it in and blocking the culvert. And this is all because the ditch was set too steep to begin with. And there's erosion, particularly back in this direction. And I'm trying to show something here. And I'm not sure if I've succeeded, but I'm standing with my pole on the ground right here. And about 3 inches away, I've stuck a second pole showing where the ground level is 3 inches away. And it's about a ½ meter down. There's a vertical drop there that is hidden by the grass. This is quite hazardous. Furthermore, this is an erosional channel that is going backwards towards the road, and it will be undercutting the road. Could be this summer if we have a big rain, could be next spring or the spring after. It's coming pretty soon. And I just want to end with a big concern. Every year, this is what this street corner looks like during the Greek festival. This is from a different perspective. The ditch erosion I was showing you was right here. This is a picture from 9 or 10 years ago. But every August, hundreds of visitors come to the Greek festival and park in our neighborhood, as you can see. Dozens of them will park on the corner with the eroded ditch. The risk of injury to those visitors exiting their cars from the passenger side is non-trivial, or trying to re-enter their cars from the passenger side is non-trivial. But when we asked about the potential liability of the city, if injury were to occur in these ditches through pedestrians falling in or a car accident, we've had T-boning accidents on this street. We're open like a sieve to major arterial roads, or through a homeowner injuring themselves trying to maintain this ditch. Would the city have any liability? I've posted at the top here. I've screen captured the comment and the answer. And the answer to a question about liability was the city encourages us to call 311. I assure you, we have had multiple calls to 311 starting at the latest last year. Nothing has been done. So I'm bringing the question forward again, and I'm going to ask again for a bit more a clear answer. And I just want to mention, I'm done with my presentation now. I was going to show you some other things. I'll just leave it up as a picture. When this question was brought forward, Charmaine suggested that this should be perhaps posed to the legal department in the city. And I wonder if that part of the ask sort of got dropped, and maybe someone in bylaw answered this question. So I'm going to ask that maybe you actually send this to the legal department with enough background and enough about our concerns about regulatory gaps, standards and safety gaps to have a clearer and more fulsome answer. Now, do you want me to stop sharing or keep the slides up?
Yeah, I think it'd be better if you stop sharing so we could get to the questions part of our.
Got it.
So that gave leeway in terms of timing and whatnot. But I just want to, just to the members committee, this is a citywide policy, and I know we're hearing today about one specific issue. It's while I recognize the importance of this issue to this community, this is not unique. These two constituents could have been describing Carleton Golf and Yacht Club in my community, where we've had this issue, and we actually did go out, and I spent about $15,000 from my office budget to hire a surveyor to go out and survey the ditches, and we found a lot of issues. The issue is then, what do you do with that data, and who's responsible, and who's responsible for what, and who should pay? It's just not that simple. Also, the community like Carleton Golf and Yacht Club, if it was applied for today, it wouldn't be approved because most of it's in the floodplain. So you have all these different situations that exist, from standards from before, what do municipalities do, how do you get to today, and then how do you deal with that? So I don't want to get too in the weeds on one specific community and one specific issue today. So if we keep questions high level, I think if you have questions that you still need the answers to from a bylaw legal perspective, I know Councillor Brockington, I'm sure, will follow up on that to make sure that you have the answers to your questions, regardless if they are the answers that maybe you want or don't want, but make sure that we get the answers to you. And I'm sure Councillor Brockington will follow up on that. So we'll go back to questions to the delegation. So we'll go to Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure I really have a question per se, because I do understand the issue. I'm dealing with a neighborhood actually that's experiencing the same thing. And I can tell you from, from my viewpoint, dealing with all the various departments has been an ongoing challenge. So this being siloed, I think if we could find a standard policy that maybe, if we had a caveat that there was each community, because every community is different. The issue is the same, but every community is different. I'm not seeing infills, but I can see how infills would really contribute to this problem. But I have collapsed culverts. I have, standing water because there hasn't been a policy. Every neighbor has, modified their ditch in a way. But now I've got little rivers on every side of a street with bulrushes coming up. People don't know who is supposed to maintain it. The neighbor's driveway is collapsing. This is an ongoing issue, but I've been dealing with this for 4 years, and nobody seems to want to take responsibility for this neighborhood. And this is a neighborhood that goes back to the former city of Gloucester. So if there was a way to make a standardized policy, because like a river, if a river, there's a dry bed in the middle, if it's higher, there's going to be standing water. We don't want that. My ditches some of them are 5 feet, and there are little children in a neighborhood. So this poses a real safety hazard. So I would love to see a standardized policy that could be tailored to a specific neighborhood. And I do believe we have the expertise that can do that. How it's paid for, that's another issue, because it is a costly problem. So, but I think the first thing we have to do is to come up with a policy that we can apply to a specific neighborhood, because everyone is different. So I sympathize with the homeowners who are here today, and I would love to see a policy that I know who to call, because every time there's an issue, there's a whole slew of different people that have to get involved. And I've had meetings with staff on this street. I know that other councillors have as well. So while some people think this is a trivial problem, it is not a trivial problem. So I hear the homeowners, and I thank you for your presentations today. So and I'm hopeful that we will come to a solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, it's not just the city too. I mean, it's you take one ditch infill, so you fill in one ditch, you're fine. Maybe you fill in a second one, you're fine. At what point do you fill in consecutive ditches where now you have a storm sewer as defined by the Provincial Ministry of Environment? Now you have a whole different scenario, and you have a whole different situation when it comes to regulation and approvals. I know I wanted to put a sidewalk on the side of a road that has an open ditch. we had to go through, we had a delay in the project, which was 6 or 8 months. What that did was it bought us the time to then go and design a storm relief valve essentially under the sidewalk to get through. We couldn't just put in a sidewalk on a rural road. I know that's one of the biggest misnomers that we have in the rural areas of why don't we have sidewalks on rural streets? It's just not that simple. The water has to go somewhere. The road is crowned, the sidewalk blocks the water. So where's the water going to go in the absence of storm sewers? You can't do it, and this is the challenge you have. Sorry, it's not. Sorry, I can't do it back and forth. But I'm just trying to explain the challenge that we have. But it's not. Anyways,
we have a similar problem with the inability to put sidewalks in a neighborhood, and we've always been low density, so it hasn't been a huge issue. But the city may be starting to put apartment buildings on these streets, and that's a different matter.
No, understood.
25-foot wide street with 4-foot ditches, no sidewalks, and apartment buildings and on-street parking. Whoa, it's pretty scary.
Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you very much for your presentations, Elizabeth and Elizabeth. They were excellent. And as my colleagues pointed out, I do see many of the same problems in my ward that you illustrated, even though the situations differ. So one of my questions is going to be for you, Elizabeth Costello, was when you talk about finding solutions. Do you have any suggestions or omissions that you saw in the policy? There was a good slide in Elizabeth Anderson's presentation about the regulatory gaps, but I just wanted to know if you had anything to add to what you'd like to see in the proposed policy, because I don't love what's presented, but I've struggled myself with coming up with alternate suggestion solutions, because as Chair Moffat pointed out, it's not a simple thing.
Well, I think what our community is hoping for is that we do have greater standards that don't rely on a 1950s design. That's number one. We have clear roles and responsibilities that require a systems approach, and that crosses departments and doesn't just land in 311 or site plan control. Like, we need to be communicating. And thirdly, I hear a lot about expense and where does the expense go? I mean, people are interested in upkeeping their properties. People are developers want to get it right the first time. They don't want to be redoing driveways. And with the current approach, that's what's going to be happening. So if we get it right, with the right standards, with the communication, with the engagement of the street or the community, looking at the elevation of the community in advance in a preventative way, then we're going to reduce the long-term costs here. So, looking at it lot by lot, we're actually going to overburden developers just as much as we're going to be overburdening residents and the city. It's just not a good way. So we have to delay this until we can get more coordination and collaboration in the policy with the standards that are for today, with climate change, with lower capacities, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, that was my next question. In terms of breaking down silos within the bureaucracy, I think that's a really good point. And I was going to ask, as a resident, what's been your experience in confronting that challenge? Is it through 311? Because as a counselor, it really does feel like residents have no choice but to involve their counselor, who then has the ability to bring multiple departments together to figure out a problem, which in some cases has been, going on for years.
So we've been quite noisy on these issues, and we've dealt through 311, we've dealt through specific departments, we've dealt through our counselor, we've dealt through the manager, we've been very active at both the public consultations and dedicated neighborhood consultations, email, telephone calls. And the conclusion that we found in the As We Heard It report is no suggestions were made from us to improve this policy. I cannot believe that was written down. So there has to be a better way, and to deny that there's a problem and to put a policy that just says what we're doing today is good enough is not good enough for our future. It's not good enough for the residents of Ottawa or, the people that build, whoever they may be. So this is just not good enough. We have to ask more of our staff to create a policy that will help.
Okay, that was going to be my last question was, did you participate in any of the consultation opportunities and how did you feel your feedback was incorporated? But you've just answered that. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Cluche.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Ms. Costello, Ms. Anderson. I appreciated it very much. And as the Chair said, the pictures you showed, the comments you've given could be everywhere. Those pictures, they could come from Alta Vista Ward. You've summarized, you've explained it well, and I appreciate it. It's the maintenance, it's the policy. You've touched on both private and private properties and public roads. And I was thinking, as you showed the road where the festival is, Linda Lane, adjacent to, on the east side of Linda Lane, adjacent, close to the Ottawa Hospital complex. Large drop, and for passengers who might not be familiar with the area, getting out of the car, the passenger side, it can be tricky. You've touched a lot on developers when there's a development, a change, but also with respect to the community like yours in my community, approximately 65, 70 years old, and that infrastructure is getting old. My one specific question for you, and I think it relates to the entire city. I think it was Ms. Costello who mentioned water from the backyards, moving it to the front yards. And I wonder if you could comment, because I will have questions to staff, about if the policy addresses, how it addresses, or how we should address those ditches or swales or easements, or that in backyards that move water between properties and to a sewer or further infrastructure. That too is an issue I have found in my community, and I just wanted you to confirm or comment or provide any recommendations you have on how we should be dealing with that with respect to the backyards easement that may be city property, that may be an easement, or that may be just abutting between two neighbors. Have you had that experience?
Yes, and I've there's a bit of brainstorming we were doing, and I feel I'm going a little bit off script from all my residents, so I don't want to speak to say confirm. I'd like to bring it back, but I will say that we do have impermeable soil conditions, or clay. And so we do have lakes in backyards, and people trying to pump it out or push it out to the front. And so there is a call from some residents. We've received emails asking for the elevation from the back to the front to be measured and surveyed. And, we couldn't help but think about some of your past programs for, lead pipe replacements. Perhaps there could be a program where we could start activating improvements with participation on a volunteer basis. But I'm going off script from my residents. I know the residents have raised the issues and would like the surveys done. And, again, ongoing collaboration is needed. I wouldn't want to speak on the exact solution, but I think there's a potential there. And so I hopefully that gives you some encouragement and hope.
Thank you. So just one follow-up. Have you found that with the lack of some maintenance on a property, it impacts the adjacent properties, the neighborhood properties?
Of course. Anytime there's interruptions and ponds, impromptu ponds and standing water, it impacts neighboring properties. If upstream, water flows with gravity's help in these systems, and if you're interrupting that grade, and getting pools, neighbors are affected. It's just it's interconnected, interdependent. Yeah.
I appreciate that you both took the time to present today. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cluche and Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Ms. Costello and Ms. Anderson for coming out today and giving us your time. You've obviously spent a lot of work on it, and it's for the whole community, so I really appreciate you doing this. One of the issues is that we have to deal property by property, because that's how you talk to property owners. But it's not. But I appreciate that you're saying that we need to look at this more holistically, and I think that's very important. And I see that when you've got neighbors versus neighbors, water's not going to stop at the property line. You have to talk to everyone together. I'm wondering, do you see a benefit in, and this is just a thought about it, and I'll ask staff this, about doing things street by street even, and that's not perfect either, but just as a starter, but in terms of a community, like getting a street together to have a discussion so that they all understand, because there seems to be, in the fact that things have been ignored for a while, let's put it that way, the maintenance, there is a real lack of knowledge of how where water's flowing to or not flowing because of what's been done on one particular property. And I just want to get away from the blame game, but I just want it to work together and have the water flow where it should be. I appreciated you talking about looking for the points of gravity. I just wanted to get your comments on possibly looking at it that way.
I think Elizabeth here is an expert in the field, and I will defer to her. I'm just going to say, why aren't we working more closely with the community associations? We've got areas here, neighborhoods by neighborhood, that are interconnected systems, and we've done the homework to know where the water pools and where the water eventually flows. And if you look at it one street, it actually can be dangerous. So you have to know where, if it breaks on one street, and if you're sending it in the wrong direction, you could be causing bigger problems. And Elizabeth, I'll defer to you if you don't mind, councillors, because she's really the expert here.
Sure.
Yeah, what I would say about that is you're still focusing on ditches that are altered by homeowners, but ditches are also altered naturally over time. And so in older ditch systems, the amount and the degradation and the potential problems associated with that natural alteration may be far worse than anything homeowners have done. Because for one thing, homeowner alterations are local, and the system-wide degradation is pervasive. Another thing is, because the ditch system, the city hasn't maintained our ditches. They are a full foot shallower than when they were put in, except for the places where sinkholes have developed, which means, we've got like hills instead of streams. And so say a homeowner put in a new driveway 30 years ago. Maybe the ditch was 8 inches lower than it is now. And then 5 years ago, another homeowner wanted to replace their driveway. Where do they set that culvert? Do they set it to the original depth, in which case it would be buried and subject to immediate frost heaving? Or do they set it to the filled in ditch, which is 8 inches shallower? That happens, it's inadvertent, and it's not something the homeowner's done. It's a mistake caused by the fact that the city is not maintaining the proper depth of the ditches in the first place. Ditches are cheaper to build, but they require maintenance, and the city does not maintain its ditches. This is a gap. It can't be solved without some budget. This was a major subject of a big 2005 and 2008 Stantec report, saying that this was a regulatory gap that occurred when amalgamation occurred. The budget to maintain surface water ditches simply went away. And now we've actually lost the corporate knowledge that it ever was something that the city did. And so that's what's wrong with this policy. It is lost sight of the need for the city to maintain the overall integrity and functioning of ditch systems before it worries about what homeowners might or might not do to further alter the ditch. Does that make any sense? Have I?
I think what I'll do is I'll ask staff these questions about this. I think that would be productive.
I think Elizabeth wants to say one more.
Yeah.
If I can just quickly build on that, we have a situation where if we look exclusively at Lexington Avenue and the way water flows, Lexington has to flow into Wilshire. So if Lexington doesn't flow properly into Wilshire, the water won't end up at Morley and Sanford, which the system dictates it will. where will it go? It will be in the street, where it will undercut the road. So that's what I'm saying. If you look at it just as a street by street, you're still limited. You have to look at the community and where the water has to flow down one street, down the next street, and down into the catch basin. Where's the catch basin? Right?
No, I get that. I get that. What I'm suggesting is just that, and I totally understand what you're saying. Sorry about that. But it's just, I'm talking with city staff being involved, not just the street talking among themselves, because it's obviously that it's going to be a domino effect. But thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, my apologies.
Thank you, Chair. And this could be for either the Elizabeths or both. Do you think that this update, this report to the Joint Committee should have spoken to issues around maintenance more than it does?
Yes.
City maintenance, yes.
Yeah, no, sorry, yes. I meant to say city maintenance. Okay.
Yes. Or the city should have a ditch maintenance policy where it holds itself to certain standards of ensuring that its existing standards for ditch construction are not degraded over time through regular monitoring and repair. It could be a separate policy. If we had a commitment to developing a maintenance policy, that would be a wonderful companion to this existing ditch alteration policy and wouldn't invalidate anything that's in the ditch alteration policy itself.
And is it your sense that some of these alterations are not necessarily happening for aesthetic reasons, but because there's been lack of maintenance over the years and people are just looking for a different way to deal with the water?
Yeah.
I think so. I think some people have tried to cover their ditches because they feel unsafe mowing them, for example. And some people have altered their ditches and they've put big pipes and they've got clean outs on both ends and there's never any issues. I don't know whether this was legal, but if there's no issues, then it's great. And it's also safer for the homeowner to maintain. And so maintenance will be better. If it's safer, homeowners are going to do a better job of maintaining. We have a lot of ditches that simply aren't maintained because you're risking life and limb to try and do it. And
yeah, no, I hear similar things in my area. So thank you for that.
There's also been a lot of transfer of ownership too, right? So
7 years.
That won't change. I mean, that won't change. That'll keep happening. So quick question for you, because we do have a local improvement policy. Have you explored that policy for your community?
Why is privatization the answer? Right? Why?
Well, because why should everyone have to pay for problems that are specific to certain communities? That's why we have local improvements. So we do that when it's the same thing. So you don't have to put your both hands up. I got you. I can see you.
Without maintenance.
But if you could just let me.
Sure.
So you have a general issue that maybe isn't solved by maintenance because you're asking about, you want them maintained, but you don't want them too steep. So, and it's possible that the original grade that they were at is not the right grade. So you need to look at that holistically in the entire community. But why should a taxpayer in a condo building on Wellington pay for that? Or why should someone in Vernon, Ontario pay for that? Again, I can see you, Elizabeth. I don't need you both hands up. I will let you speak. I'm not really asking a question, but it's just when water service was brought to Mgtt, the village of Mgtt paid for it through a local improvement. It was a benefit to the community, to the local community. That's why Mgtt paid for it. So they didn't burden the rest of taxpayers of the city of Ottawa to bring them water service. Did they need it? Some did, some didn't. Some people just wanted to switch off from wells to a more reliable, something they don't have to worry about every so often. Same with septic systems and sewers and making that switch. That's a local improvement, and that's why we have that policy. You can go look at other policies. It goes back to the 1980s. At Kemp Park, same thing. They brought in water years ago, and it was paid for by the residents in Kemp Park. So I think if you want a solution, the question seems to be, you possibly have an avenue for a solution, but you don't like the mechanism in which you'd have to pay something for it.
No.
Can I
Elizabeth, you had your hand up multiple times, so go ahead. You can respond to that.
Yes, so open water ditches are our stormwater management system. Other communities have hard sewer systems. Their lifespan is 100 years. Our lifespan of ours is 70, because that's what I've been told by the city engineers. So our system has reached the end of its lifespan. Now, if you looked at a neighborhood with 100-year-old sewers and they needed replacing, would you require the users to pay?
Well, it depends on how I got paid for in the first place. But if it was once it's paid for in the first place by, let's say, if it's a brand new development, those costs are, so a brand new community right now can do fill in their ditches because you've engineered it from the start. It's the development that pays for it, and it's development charges through that, and it's the fees of the homes that actually pay for that work in the first place. Now, once the city takes it on, the city pays for it. But I'm having a difficult time understanding exactly what you are looking for in this community. And again, it's probably not the greatest conversation to have in a committee where we're supposed to be talking about citywide things, and we're just honing down to one specific issue in one specific community, because I think it's going to cloud the issue elsewhere. But do you want a community-wide storm sewer, or do you just want your ditches maintained? Because the two things are very different when it comes to this committee, and we're really here to talk about one. We're not here to talk about ditch maintenance.
We need to have our system renovated because it's reached the end of its lifespan. Our understanding is that if this were hard infrastructure, we would not be presented solely with user pay options, that it would be paid for out of the sewer budget or something.
Not if you're shifting from one to another. If you're just talking about maintaining your ditches and going in with a grade all and cleaning out ditches, which happens in the rural area all the time, so I'm not sure why it doesn't happen in your community.
I'm talking about doing whatever is required at the end of this life of this ditch system to ensure that they are renovated while remaining their functionality and ensuring our safety, whether that involves it doesn't necessarily involve sewer systems. There's no case, I don't think there's any case to be made that anyone needs to come in and rip up our streets and give us a community-wide system of sewers. It's not necessary, but there are places here where it's unsafe and dysfunctional. And I think it's up to the city to decide what investments need to be made to ensure that when they're renovated, by whatever means, ensure the functionality and preserve our safety, are necessary in an urbanizing environment at the end of the lifespan of the system.
Okay, so in my opinion, that's not a ditch alteration policy issue. That's an overall issue that you have.
That's why we talk to regulatory gaps. We feel there are gaps that cannot be addressed by this ditch alteration policy, but do require consideration. And I think Elizabeth might have something else to say.
Well, no, I don't want to keep on going. I mean, because I think we're veering off topic because ultimately your issue, in my estimation, is not a ditch alteration policy issue. You're upset about your issue and you're concerned that it's not being covered in this, but I don't fully agree that based on the outcome that you want, it falls under ditch alteration policy. I'm going to go to Councillor Brockington. It's not a debate, so I'm going to go to Councillor Brockington.
Chair, I was just going to intervene and say a number of colleagues have questions for staff. I have questions for staff. I want to talk about maintenance as well. So as if there are no other questions for the delegates, perhaps we could go to staff.
Absolutely. I don't see any other hands up, so for sure.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Thank you, Ms. Costello, for your time here. And we will go to questions to staff. Again, I think we all have specific issues that we deal with. I know in the case I mentioned in Carl Coffin Yacht Club, the residents. Can we make sure that everyone's muted? We're done with the delegation's point of the meeting. So the situation, just to explain the situation that we had in Carl Coffin Yacht Club, the residents were presented with the information that they had. A lot of it was culverts heaving. A lot of it was the ditches were at the wrong grades, inverted culverts that happen over time. Again, it all comes down to who's responsible. And in reality, the policies that we have today, stemming from 2003 changes, makes the homeowner responsible for the culvert. Why is the homeowner responsible for the culvert? Because not everyone needs a culvert. So why should people who don't need culverts have to pay for people who have culverts? I get that point. I mean, there was the policies previous to amalgamation. So in Rideau Township, if you wanted your culvert replaced, the township would come and replace your culvert. In the city of Nepean, it was the same way, but in other places, it wasn't the same way. It was that it would be your responsibility. So after amalgamation, the transition board and the various municipalities that came together, they generally took the lowest common denominator, which was the easiest one to maintain long term, and that was the one that put the responsibility onto the homeowners. That's why I've been upset about the ditch policy for years, and why we tried to come up with something. But every time we talk about this, and I've been talking about this for 12 years, it was my motion that brought forward this report in the first place back in 2016. It's taken that long to get here, but it's tough because every time you run into something, you don't run into an easy answer. You don't run into an easy solution. I've seen people illegally fill in their ditches. They do the proper swale, they do the catch basin, and everything's fine. I've also seen residents who have walked through a hole in their front yard because the previous owner put in a culvert. It degraded over time, and now they're looking to the city to say, well, come fix my front ditch and my front culvert. And they're only get told, well, no, that's your responsibility. So it's just not, I'm not going to say it's the most complex issue we've ever dealt with, because I don't think we're going to have a public inquiry on ditches, but it is one of the ones that is incredibly challenging, because there just doesn't seem to be a decent solution. I mean, Kevin Lamer's on here too. 9 out of 10 neighbor disputes that I deal with are related to side yard, rear yard, or front yard drainage, and it's not always the city's responsibility, but it's quite something when you deal with it. Anyways, so I imagine we will have questions to staff, and I wouldn't mind asking some myself too when we get to the point. But we'll start with Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, let's just get straight into it. So to staff, the amended policy does not get into maintenance, understanding policy, the sort of macro level. Could staff just tell us, how do we address maintenance going forward? One of the delegates suggested this could possibly be a second document. Could staff just touch upon this, please?
Thank you, Chair. Bryden, could you please answer that question in regards to maintenance?
Oh, good morning, everyone. Chair, as far as maintenance goes, the maintenance responsibility of the city is to maintain our ditch systems as they were designed. And this is the challenge that lies in with all of our work. So when we receive a request, we would assess the address. We would then identify if there was an issue there. We would then discuss with the homeowner. If it is a system issue, which is typically the problem we run across with ditch maintenance in urban, suburban, or rural subdivisions, we would then engage with our infrastructure group, with Peter Mgtt specifically, and then we would look at what options we have to maintain that area. When we get into that, we get into the situation, Chair, of, again, Councillor, the yacht club area, right? So we have multiple issues. They could be infills, they could be natural silting. In the diagram that was provided by the Elizabeths there, the picture of the replaced culvert. So a replaced crossroad culvert, we have to try and fit into the existing conditions so it actually functions properly versus making an issue. So I will say, for maintenance, it's not always an individual road's response. It is a larger response from multiple groups to try and resolve a larger issue for the most of the time.
And we have a set standard or criteria for maintenance. Is there a document that exists that the public can access, and is that document reviewed on any consistent basis for upgrading?
So Chair, in regards to Councilor Brockington, your question, so we have our maintenance quality standards for ditching. The primary function of maintenance is to ensure the ditch is functioning as designed. And again, that is returning the ditch to its normal functioning capacity to drain the roadway. That's the main function of the ditch, is to drain the road so it maintains a stable road condition. As far as a set wider standard, that's where we have to work with our colleagues in infrastructure to ensure we are looking at that system-wide response, as well as with Kevin's group on infills and bylaw with enforcement to ensure that we can try and achieve, again, going back to the design of that ditch.
There was a commitment made earlier this past spring to do a visual assessment, a walkabout in this particular community fairly soon. Are we still on track to do that?
So, Chair, my understanding is there was some work identified in this area, this community association on Lexington, to try and alleviate some challenges there. From my understanding, that is still on schedule for this season. I'll have to follow up with the maintenance team for that area on that specific one.
That's a separate job, Bryden. There's a commitment from city staff to do a walkabout, a visual assessment of all the infrastructure on all of the streets in Cortland Park, because the more intensive review that Mr. Mackay had alluded to during the public consultations was 2 years away. And in the interim, a commitment was made to do a visual assessment of the infrastructure this past spring, which is different than the work that's been committed to on Lexington. So I'm looking for an update in this regard.
So Chair, I did receive a note that Paul Mantle.
Quentin is on the line, and I think Quentin would be best to answer that question. Just take off the hot seat for a moment. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Charmaine. And through the chair, to answer the councilor's questions, most certainly we've started that assessment and doing those walkthroughs of the observations. We do need to do some follow-up work with infrastructure services, specifically Peter McKay, to have some discussions on those observations, and we'd be happy to come back to you and provide you with an update shortly on our work that we've been doing in that community.
Thank you. My final question for now is just greater education for property owners on ditches, ditch maintenance, when to call in, who's responsible for what. What can the city do to better everyone's awareness on ditch responsibility, maintenance, all of the above?
Thank you, Chair. We are doing an update once it is approved. There will be an update on the ditch, the maintenance, on all the different pieces as well. As was mentioned before, as you can see, there's lots of different departments that are involved, but I know it was referred to that silos. What this project has done is it's brought everyone together, and we are working very closely together. And so we, even though we can't have one department that works on everything, because there are, as the chair alluded to, ditches are complicated, but we are working together to ensure that there's good communication, and also ensure that we have a good communication outreach to our residents. Also, to the point in the policy, there is an appendix that has all of the who you can reach out to. It's in the appendix, so if the individuals change, then we can update it. But it's very clearly laid out of who's accountable and who's responsible for the different parts of the ditches. But again, we can always do a better job communicating to our residents, and that's something we will be doing, and updating the website with the information.
Thank you. I'll park it for there. I'd like to work with you on that, because I think there needs to be some proactive outreach in addition to website upgrade. It's basically, I don't know if you can insert it in water bills but proactively go to property owners that have ditches once the policy's been passed for that information. But anyway, Chair, I'll park it there for now, and thanks staff for the answers.
Thanks. I know one of the challenges we face too. I mean, I could probably go on for hours about the challenges that we face when it comes to culverts and ditches. But when the original culvert's put in on a laneway, so if you apply for a private approach and you put in a culvert, it's your private approach, which again, why you pay for it. There's a grading required. Now, when you go to replace that culvert, you've really provided no guidance. You just replace it, and it confounds the issue a little bit, because you have someone just coming in and replacing a culvert at what grade? There's no inspection of it. And the labor intensiveness of actually inspecting culverts and grading is something that I think township used to do, but we don't anymore. And it adds to the problem, but again, the solution is just not that simple. We have a finite stormwater budget. We've created that. We've isolated that back in 2016. We pay into that, but just that solution to Carleton-Coffey Club alone would be $3 million. I don't think we spend $50 million annually on the stormwater system that we have today. Rural residents as a whole pay in between $2 to $3 million a year to stormwater infrastructure, and that one solution for Carleton-Coffey Club would take that entire annual budget. It doesn't account for the $12 million you spend annually to replace rural culverts. So, yeah, the complexities here are immense. We aren't going to solve them all today. And two, I mean, I know there's been talk about deferral and stuff this is a policy update. The policy exists. We don't necessarily need to defer anything. If we want further refinements, if we want more discussion, we can have that discussion. We can provide direction to have more in-depth discussion about this issue. It's going to take time. I've taken 12 years and I feel like I haven't even solved a thing on this one. So it's a tough one. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff, for preparing all this work. I think it's important that the conversation has started because I remember in 2018, I heard a lot going door to door about ditches and concerns, and I was ill-prepared on how to answer residents at that time, but I've learned a lot since then about them, and the fact that we're raising the issue is really important. First of all, they're very environmentally sound, when you compare it to putting in a stormwater sewer system. So it's worth maintaining them. And but there is a big education gap. As Councillor Brockington mentioned, we do need more education on this. I found it for myself. My concern is that even if we get to the standards we want, dealing property by property is kind of divisive sometimes, and it puts neighbors against neighbors as well. And I'm concerned about that. But also, it does need to be looked at holistically. And I'm wondering if you're willing to look at it. I suggested streets, but I was just sort of, really, I should have said neighborhood. I've got like whole neighborhoods where the ditches are a factor. There's at least 3 of them in my ward. One is very significant, that's Lakeview, but there's 2 others that still have ditches, and they're right in a inner urban area, which we don't think of as a ditch place, but they're there. So I just need that ability to have a meeting with everyone in that neighborhood, maybe flyer it so they can work together on what needs to be done, because there's so much. The responses in terms of the questions and answers that came in were very helpful, because these are typical questions I hear, and I appreciate getting those answers. But my other concern is staffing, because we're talking about not just this year, but every year. Who's going to make sure that it's still going well? It only takes a couple of years for things to get out of whack if somebody doesn't keep up their end, because it could just be, for not trying or not knowing. So how do we get past that? Because it says no financial implications, and I just can't see that. I think we have to spend money on not just maintaining, but I mean to monitoring. So how do we continue to monitor to make sure these systems work well?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask Peter McKay from Asset Management to answer that about the area studies that occur. Peter?
Good morning. The camera coming on. Good morning, Chair. So currently the city is undertaking 4 neighborhoods for ditch studies. These have been identified previously based on a very poor level of service. Some of them are subject to intensification, some of them are not. But the studies that we do are very comprehensive, and that we have to look at all of the ditch issues within the neighborhood, and we need to look outside the neighborhoods as well. The first thing we need to look at in the ditch study is the downstream capacity where we're discharging stormwater. So that has to have sufficient capacity for the stormwater from the neighborhood and be able to accept, you know, the flows from the neighborhood. When we look at the studies, we look at, as the residents from Cortland Park mentioned, we do look at grades of the ditches, but that's only really one issue that we look at. We look at the capacity of all of the culverts. We look at the capacity of the outlets, and we also look at the different types of rainfall events and the frequency of the larger stormfall events to ensure that we can maintain a proper level of service. These are long-term studies that will take several years to remedy these ditch neighborhoods. This can't be fixed overnight. So in year one, we do a study, then we have to initiate a capital project, and that goes through the normal design and construction process. We're not going to tear up a whole neighborhood in one shot. We have to gradually phase it over several years throughout the neighborhood. So we will be kind of reinstating some of these neighborhoods to a functioning drainage system.
Thank you. And can you talk about how we're educating people more, as Councillor Brockington put out? What can we do to better inform people of what they're supposed to do in terms of maintaining it? Because I don't think it's getting through. And I'm willing to have information sessions for sure, and specific to like a neighborhood so that people really understand their neighborhood. Is that possible?
Through the chair, yeah, definitely that's possible. For the neighborhoods that we are undertaking studies, we are planning a public consultation process through to advise them of what our findings are, to solicit feedback from the residents to see what the issues are, and provide guidance to residents about, you know, what can be done to properly maintain these systems going forward. Even simple things like planting in the ditch can cause some issues, and ensuring that culvert entrances are free and clear are just simple things. Now there are, you know, environmental conditions such as snow and ice that are challenging for operational staff to address. So, you know, these things we can certainly advise residents on.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think it would be good to have sort of a sheet of do's and don'ts, perhaps, or something along that line, just on basics of ditches, because there's so much that can be done. Like you said, they're fairly straightforward, but most people are not aware that I can give to communities, just one sheet, if that's possible. Could that be done? A communication on just do's and don'ts?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Actually, we have that, and I'm going to ensure that it's sent to you right after I get off this call.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. I've been asked to chair for a moment. I'm not sure if my list is correct, but next up, Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you all for the presentation. Altus has a lot of ditches and culverts, and many in need of repair because our community is 70 years old. And let me say, Peter Mgtt, thank you, and you and your colleagues who have assisted me over the past 8 years in addressing some of these issues. The policy talks about wanting the city to meet its obligations to property owners to prevent unauthorized ditch alterations while protecting city infrastructure. That's what it says. And Bryden said, with respect to maintenance, the city is obligated to maintain the system to function as it was designed. And so, but we also hear that it's up to the property owner to maintain the ditches. And we know there is a lack of transfer of ownership is an issue, lack of economic ability to maintain the ditch. lack of elderly persons who might not be able to maintain the ditch, lack of understanding how it impacts neighbors or the system as a whole. And so thank you, Charmaine and Councillor Kavanaugh, the do's and don'ts. But we know that it won't reach everyone. All of our comms and our outreach doesn't reach everyone. And even there are some property owners who fill in the ditch to increase the perceived size of their property. Might be safety, but sometimes it's aesthetics. And it's not their problem because it just impacts. So, and then there's the culvert under the driveway that is collapsed or that is blocked, and the water doesn't flow, and it needs to be dug up. Councillor Eglai asked, I think Councillor Eglai asked about money, and Chair Moffat talked about $50 million to maintain the sewers. My first question to staff is, sewers and ditches do the same job. They move water too, so that we can deal with water systematically and properly. Does the city pay about $50 million a year to maintain the sewers in this city? Per year?
Thank you, Chair. Clinton, could you please answer that question?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Oops, sorry, Councillor.
Oh, the question was the $50 million. Is that what we pay in sewers? Am I correct, Chair?
Yeah.
Through our maintenance budgets to sewers is the question?
That's my question.
Okay, through the chair. Unfortunately, I don't have that information right now. But most certainly, Councillor, we can follow up and provide that information to you with the exact figure and number.
Noted.
Okay.
My real question is, in an urban environment, and I recognize rural, the report deals with both rural and urban, we do not pay anywhere near that much on a prorated basis to maintain ditches in a ward like Alta Vista. I don't need the number, but I think that's correct. But they do the same job. And so the expectation of our residents with respect to sewers, with respect to ditches, would be, I think, would be that the city might also pay for those. Sorry, my phone is ringing. I apologize. And so with respect to maintenance, this policy does not address that, but it is the elephant in the room. It is the elephant in the room with respect to maintenance for the reasons that I provided earlier. So my question is, how does this policy in any way streamline the process and empower residents to alert the city to assess and determine the next steps for remediating ditches which have eroded, or for a variety of reasons that I've enumerated, have eroded or aren't functioning as they are intended to?
Brendan, would you be best to answer that question about maintenance?
Yeah, most certainly through the chair. From the maintenance perspective, I mean, we have our maintenance quality standards, which we follow and adhere to. For those larger communities or areas where there are kind of more significant issues, we do partner with our colleagues in infrastructure services to undertake those condition assessments to determine what is the best approach with regards to addressing the overarching maintenance issues that may exist within a community. So it really depends on the situation and the issues at hand, Councillor, as to the approach that we take. But most certainly, if it's broader or expands across kind of multiple properties, or it affects the larger conveyance system of the stormwater, we would engage our partners in infrastructure services to address the situation and undertake a review.
Got it. And we need to be very clear to residents with ditches and culverts at not on their property, it's on city property, but adjacent to their property, at their property lines, what the expectations are of them. Are residents required to cover the costs of reinstating, repairing those ditches and culverts that are adjacent to their property lines?
Yeah, through the chair, most certainly, councillor, they are responsible if it is on their personal property or private property. They are responsible for undertaking the repair to those culverts or maintaining the ditch. However, if it's on city property or public property, it would become a maintenance issue for the city to address.
But even if the ditch or culvert is not on their property because of city right of way, residents are expected to maintain those ditches. Is that not correct?
So maintain, there's two different types of maintain, right? So there's maintain from just the aesthetic maintenance of a ditch, so cutting the lawn, but the grade of the ditch and the maintenance of the grade is not the homeowner's responsibility, that's the city. So you got to make sure that we're qualifying the word maintain properly.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. And yes, you're right. And the delegations address the safety issue and the slope and mowing that and how that functions. And so there is the issue of the long-term cost, the long-term liability and cost to the city of an improperly maintained ditch or culvert. And as that maintenance might not be done properly as defined by the chair, and thank you for that, it is operating less well. And so another question I have is, can a neighbor and an improperly functioning ditch impacts the others, adjacent neighbors, adjacent properties? Can a neighbor get a service request for a ditch for a property that is adjacent to their homes? And let me go to my real question, my subsequent question. And what will bylaw do with that? Will bylaw issue an order to that property owner to maintain the ditch at a certain standard?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask my colleague, Kevin Lamer. Would you please answer that question? Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Charmaine. Sorry, you did say Kevin, right? Sorry, I missed that. Okay. Thank you, Councillor, through the chair. Absolutely. And I was just going to add to this that we have updated our knowledge-based article for 311 about a lot of these common questions we've been getting, because people do get sometimes frustrated calling 311 and which group it's being delivered to. So provided we have the information we need, we've tried to clean up that process so that we assess the complaint based on what the complaint is when it comes in. So for example, if it comes in and it's in accordance with this policy, if it's, an alteration, meaning somebody is putting in a pipe or just filling it in, absolutely that will be, indicated to our team and the inspection team, and we'll work with bylaw to get those resolved. If it's strictly a maintenance type, as what the presenters were talking about earlier, where there's standing water or the water's ponding and it doesn't seem to be outletting or draining, then we would work with Quinton's team. Basically, it would be usually dispatched to road operations. They would do that review and assessment to try and determine what the problem is. Is it because somebody isn't cutting their grass? Is it because, to Councillor Moffat's point, has somebody, is the grading itself not working where there's a high point and all the water is just ponding and it's actually not going down the downstream culvert? Or is it 3 lots over? Because something's happened at 3 lots over. So depending on that, the findings of that, usually it's our road maintenance team that would go out and correct me if I'm wrong, Biden, but they would look to see what that particular issue is and then follow up with the appropriate team. If it's somebody that did do, it's a bylaw issue, property standards, for example. If it's somebody that did a illegal ditch infill, that would come to our inspection and we would work with bylaw to get that resolved. Or for example, if it's a larger network issue, that's where we'd reach out to our colleagues in asset management to see, okay, now we need to look at this because there might be a larger problem here that seems to be happening in the network. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
It does. Okay. It does. It is the simple, and this is my final question comment. If someone, elderly persons, not able to do maintenance for whatever reason, steepness of the slope, accessibility, age, economics, how will we be able to ensure that their property is maintained, the ditch in front of their property is maintained to the standard we're asking of them for the benefit of the entire community? Because it just reaches out and it impacts the other neighbors. And very often as councillors, I don't know if my colleagues, it's their experience, we get those calls, my neighbor is not maintaining the ditch and it's impacting my property, and what can you do about it? That's the reality of the close community we live in, and how the system is interrelated, and the water has to go somewhere. So thank you. I appreciate the answers to the question. This policy does not address that issue, the maintenance issue. I recognize it doesn't. It is something that this city will have to deal with. Thank you.
There's one thing I've learned in 12 years, that there's nothing simple about drainage.
Simple.
And there are
Absolutely.
no simple answers to drainage. Councillor Egli. You're on mute.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to say I'm struggling this morning. I've had three separate thoughts. One, to dissent on the report. Two, to defer the report for more information. Three, to provide some sort of direction to staff so we have more context before we vote on it in full at council. Councillor Kutcher referred to it as the elephant in the room. I'm having a very difficult time looking at this issue in a vacuum. I can't help but feel that if there was a better understanding of the maintenance program, a better enforcement of the maintenance program, more regular maintenance just writ large, that there would be less issues around alterations. There would be less complaints to councillors' offices. There would be less complaints to 311. So I really struggle with dealing with one but not with the other, though I understand what the report speaks to. But because of what the report does speak to, I don't think it actually addresses the problem, at least not addresses it in its entirety. So what I'm wondering is staff able between now and when we do vote on this in council, provide some sort of a memo to all of council that speaks to the existing maintenance program? One would talk about what the scope and maintenance, scope and nature of our maintenance program is, because I am cognizant of what the chair said, that the mowing of it, for example, is the person whose property it's on or adjacent to, but the pitch or the depth is something else. If we could have clarity on that division of work, if you will, if we could have clarity on what the total budget is for ditch maintenance for the city, and the amount of departments and or employees engaged on a yearly basis in ditch maintenance, I think that would be helpful. If I can get that commitment from staff, I'm prepared to support this report today, based on the work that's been put in, with the proviso that I may change my mind between now and council, depending on what's set out in that memo that I'm asking for. But I think that memo would be very helpful, not only for the people sitting in this meeting, but all of council who are voting on this, because I think the public struggles with the distinction between maintenance and replacement. And again, I think there's a causal connection between the level and type of maintenance and the need for connection or repair to it. So is that something staff feels comfortable to be able to provide between now and when we vote on this at council?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask Quentin.
Thank you, Charmaine. Through the chair, most certainly that's something we can undertake, is to respond to and answer those questions, Councillor, with regards to our maintenance quality standards, the works that's performed, with regards to maintenance, the budget that's allocated to that, and the number of staff that do work on ditch maintenance throughout the year. That's most certainly something we can undertake and provide.
And I think, Quentin, if I can just be a bit more granular, just for the public's sake as well, if there could be a good short explanation as to what the city means by maintenance in terms of their jurisdiction, if you will, and what falls into the property owner's jurisdiction, I think that would be also helpful. So again, if you have sufficient direction to go ahead and provide that, then I'm prepared to support this morning. But again, I may change my mind depending on what we see, or I know Councillor Brockton is looking at maybe moving some sort of amendment or having some further discussion when it does come to council. So I'll be interested to see what he comes up with in that regard as well. But I'll just leave it there for now. But I just think that it's very difficult to separate the two in determining how we proceed with this. Thank you.
Thank you. We should have done one of those, a never before tried triple joint meeting and brought in Transportation Committee because all those issues, right? So the road maintenance is the one that deals with with ditch maintenance. So the same group that's out there dealing with your sidewalks and your roads and plowing your roads, that's the one that deals with the regular maintenance of the ditches. So that's all under Transportation Committee. Councillor Meehan.
Thank you. I can't help but feel, I mean, we have so many questions and there's so much confusion about this because we haven't got a really straightforward policy on this. I mean, we have a policy, but nobody seems to understand exactly who's responsible for parts of the policy. So I'm just wondering, number one, I'm going to drill down to as basic as it can possibly be. Does the city have a schedule to inspect? Like, first of all, do we have, we have identified all the communities in the city that have ditches and have issues with their ditches? Number one, do we have that?
Thank you, Chair. First point is that as I mentioned before, that there is in the appendix of the policy of everyone, so all the different pieces and all the different who's accountable. So for that's the first piece. And the next piece in regards to, I'm going to ask Peter, do we have a list of all the communities of when their ditches are for the maintenance piece and the renewal? Peter?
Peter?
To the chair, yeah, we know generally throughout the city where ditch neighborhoods have which streets and which neighborhoods have ditches.
Okay.
We don't have an established frequency of an inspection or maintenance. What we do is respond to a large part to inquiries and known issues.
Okay, I think number one, can I start? I'm going to stop you there, Peter. I think this is where we're running into problems. We have to let those neighborhoods know that we're not going to just respond to complaints, that there's going to be a schedule of inspections in these neighborhoods, and they're going to know when their ditches are going to be inspected. Okay, the homeowners are going to be told at that point what their responsibility is for the ditches. Then you're going to identify the problems in there. Okay, and these neighborhoods need to know that their ditches are a priority, okay, and that they have a responsibility, and the city has a responsibility. So that's my number one. I think we haven't done a good job in driving that home. Like, we wouldn't just really, like in our new communities, the way that we're putting in our manholes and the culverts, we have to inspect them. So we have to inspect our ditches because this ends up to be a huge problem for a lot of people. Do we have a permit system when people want to alter their ditch or cover their ditch? Is there a nominal fee or anything? Do they require a permit to do that?
Thank you, Chair. That would be, that's in this policy. That would be the ditch alteration. And we go by the same policy as the local improvements that went before Committee and Council in November of 2021.
Okay.
So yes, there is.
I didn't get that. So this is what we're suggesting. So so in order to justify the necessity of a permit, I think we have to drive home just how important our ditches are. And any alteration has to be inspected. Any plan for alteration has to be inspected, and it has to be for the good of the entire neighborhood. So and also, Mr. McKay, you said that there's 4 neighborhoods where we're doing a ditch study right now. Do those neighborhoods know they're being subject to a ditch study?
To the chair, yes, we've been in communication with the councillor's office and the community associations associated with these neighborhoods.
And can you identify those neighborhoods?
We're doing to the chair, we've done studies in Richmond and Munster. We're doing one in Lakeview Park, one in City View, and some of the ditch streets in Westboro.
Okay. And is the study meant to determine the best policy to maintain and get the water to move, or is it to determine whether or not these communities have to have major remedial work done, like sewers and stuff?
To the chair, the purpose of the study is to basically reinstate a functioning drainage system within the neighborhood.
Okay.
So we're looking at the whole neighborhoods comprehensively.
Okay, and you say this has been ongoing for a while. When do we expect that report back? Those reports back?
To the chair, we expect some preliminary results by the fall of 2022 for the neighborhoods that are currently under study.
Well, that's interesting. That's coming up this fall. We want to alter the policy right now, and then we're gonna get the results after we do this. I don't know if this is the cart before the horse. I'd love to see what the studies show us in these 4 neighborhoods that we want to reinstate. And then maybe that's the time when we take a look at this policy. Yeah. Well, I think that my personal opinion is if we have to impress upon these neighborhoods. I think they know, but they also have to know that the city takes this very seriously, that there is an inspection schedule, that they have what their responsibility is for the ditches. If there's any alteration, that there's going to be an inspection and the permit will be issued, but it has to be, we have strict policies. And I think do we actually have when did we do the latest study on the capacity of all of the downtown infrastructure to handle water? When was the last time we ever did that? I know a lot of the neighborhoods have the old systems of ditches, but if we were to remediate some of these, can the current system handle the water that we'll be putting into them? I just, like, everything's interconnected. We change one area, it's going to affect another area, it's going to affect another. It's all going a certain way. Do we have the pipes and everything? Maybe I'm off course on this one, but I'll just go back to, I'll ask that at another time. But I would like to see the results of this 4 neighborhood study on what it would take to reinstate the functioning capacity of the city, because it's a big issue. So I don't know about the timing of this, if this can be delayed just until after we see that study. I don't know if anybody agrees with me on that, but I'll just leave it there, okay?
Thank you, Chair. To the point, this is an updated policy. We already have a policy in place. We're updating it, so it would not impact the studies that are underway, because it's updating the policy. So if we delay the update to the policy, this could mean that residents will be filling in their ditches, which causes issues. So what the policy does, it puts in the language to allow people through the local improvement policy to fill in or alter their ditches, but that's what the policy is doing. It's updating the existing policy that we were asked to look at. So it would not impact the work that Peter's team is doing, because we're updating the existing policy. So we can avoid ditches being altered, which in fact, if they are altered without due diligence, that causes issues. Thank you.
Thanks. Nothing prevents us from looking at this again. I wouldn't recommend sort of motion on the fly today, but discussion. I know Councillor Brockington's thinking of stuff. I know other members are thinking of stuff. Councillor Kitts, wouldn't hurt to sort of figure out the best path forward, how we want to further investigate this issue and come back to Council on July 6th with something. Councillor Kitts.
Thanks, Chair. Good lead into what I wanted to say. So, as Councillor Eagle said, I'm not entirely comfortable supporting the report today. I don't feel like the local improvement policies presented are very accessible or practical for residents. And we heard from the delegations, they feel more work needs to be done. At the same time, I know how long staff has been working on this, and this is just an update. So I would like to provide direction to staff to establish a counselors sponsors group to further study the ditch alteration policy in consultation with affected community associations and provide a new update in the next term of council. Is that a direction that staff can accept, or would that need to be a motion?
Well, I think it wouldn't hurt to because I'm not sure what other councilors are thinking of, and I know Councilor Brockman has some thoughts. So I like where you're going. I think that would frame well into a motion at council.
Okay.
But I wouldn't mind having some further discussion with other members between now and then to see if we can package up a bit more of a comprehensive thought process at council.
All right, sounds good. So I'll support the report today, predicated on the fact that I'll be bringing something to council, and I can work with staff in between.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Councilor Kavanaugh?
Yeah, just quickly, I like that direction because it does feel like we need a little more work on this, and like-minded councillors who are being affected the same way. I think it would be helpful to talk to each other. So thank you to Councillor Kitts on that.
Well, especially when we see that
don't get a vote today, but
sure. Especially when we see that there's a desire to talk about the other issue too, right? The maintenance issue and that kind of piece that fits in the Transportation Committee, doesn't fit into our terms of reference here on either committee. Well, actually, ARAC it would. Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Kitts, for getting us moving, I think, in the right direction. My suggestion today, Chair, procedurally, is that the committee defer the matter before us straight to council. It means the committee will not take a position one way or another in the matter, and it will give us some time, colleagues, to think about what we want to do at council. I only saw the delegates' presentations late last night. I really did not have time to come with a motion, but similar to Councillor Egley, I'm just not sure where I am yet. So I would like to move that we defer the staff recommendation straight to council at the July 6th meeting.
Well, we'd refer it with a non-decision. You'd be referring it to
the
council without making a decision. Ultimately, I will say this: whether we approve this today or whether we don't approve it today or we punch it to council, it doesn't change a whole lot. It doesn't change a whole lot in terms of what the folks from Carleton Heights were saying. They're asking for more consideration. They're asking for something that's not here currently. Again, we can approve this. Nothing stops us from looking at things further. It doesn't end here. It's a policy that exists, and we're simply updating it. But that's Caitlin. Did you have something you wanted to jump in on because you came on?
She's either
she froze just a second.
Yeah.
There we go.
I did. My comment was only what you said already, which was that it would be referred to council without recommendation if that is indeed.
Chair, that would be my preference for today.
Sounds good. Before we do that, because I have some questions. I don't want to, because I wouldn't mind getting through the questions today, so we don't end up having a fulsome drainage. We've had fulsome drainage discussions at council before. They don't always go well. So since we're here to talk about drainage in this setting, we'll just continue doing that. So just from the report, from the evaluations of other, like obviously at the city and prior to amalgamation, we had multiple municipalities with multiple viewpoints on ditch alteration. Some allowed it, some didn't. We, I believe, did a scope. We looked at other municipalities as to what they do. What were some of the findings through that part of it?
Thank you, Chair. Kevin? Third-party review of municipalities.
Yeah. So Councillor Moffat, sorry, could you repeat the last part? Just in far what we did pre-amalgamation to where we are today?
No, I'm just using that as a just prefacing my question by saying we know that the municipalities had different policies prior to amalgamation. I assume it's the same today. So curious as to what our review brought forward in terms of what other municipalities do on this exact same issue.
Part of our review process with our working group is we had hired a consultant to do a municipal review, And there were several sections in one of our technical memos where they pulled how they also handle, if you will, ditch alteration. Very similar to the city of Ottawa. I think we actually got a compliment saying we're a bit of a lead on this as far as going to this level of review that we've undertaken here in the city of Ottawa. But the majority of them are following very similar process in that at the time, and this is something hearing all the questions today, is when we approve at the time that that development went in, that was the service level that was provided as part of that subdivision. As if it today was a new rural estate subdivision, ditching was the design component that was, reviewed and put into place, and it has all the requirements that we need as far as, how to manage water, but not just water, but water quality and water quantity. So that's something, there's been a lot of comments today about standing water and what have you. Sometimes that's actually part of the design of the system is to retain that water system. However, I don't want to digress. So the other municipalities also have said, if somebody is looking to alter that design, then it's imperative that you look at it from a subdivision or stormwater management review of the community, because that's how the original community was designed. As you had said before, if you start making modifications to one or two ditches, ultimately it can have a big impact on the system. So I think the consistent messages we have been hearing is you have to look at it as a system approach, that if you're moving away from ditches to another type of alternative, you have to look at the system. If you don't, you're putting the city at risk, whether it be a flooding issue, whether it be a drainage issue, whether it be a ponding issue. So that was a consistent municipal review that we did come back in the consultant's review, and those technical memos are available if somebody wants to, if you'd like to review them. I believe they're part of the report, Charmaine, is that correct? Yes. Does that answer your question?
No, for sure. I just furthering the conversation. So from a cost perspective, in terms of cost recovery as to who pays for what, did you find differences in that scope? Again, if I look at pre-amalgamation Rideau Township, if you wanted to fill in your ditch in Rideau Township prior to amalgamation, there was a process. You paid for it, but there was inspections. There was a pre-inspection, a during construction inspection, a post-inspection. It might run you between $3,000 and $5,000 at that time, but that's the whole cost of putting in the culvert, the catch basin, the swales, make sure there's no other impacts. Again, we've talked about why that in isolation might be okay, but as you connect them all together, it's a problem. But did you have a similar situation have we seen other municipalities that maybe offered the opportunity for that to happen, but again, because it's your ditch and it's your private culvert, that it's on you?
Again, I think the consistent messaging was there is a subject point of risk if municipalities get into trying to allow one person to do something into those costs that you'd indicated. That sounds to me a very local type cost to a homeowner to fill in the pipe. I think where the municipality has received the recommendations and should be consistent is you have to look at the network. You look at the network, that engineering review is where all the costs come in. And I think traditionally that's where a lot of the local residents aren't willing to take that on. I don't want to throw a term out there. Peter might know more of what a stormwater management review might cost the city, but that's where I think the difference was. Some municipalities may have accepted the risk to say we will allow, an infinite one lot review with a very low cost item, but that risk is obviously over a number of lots happening. It becomes a larger risk to the city. So the city's taken the position that if you want to do any type of review, moving away from a ditch system, you have to look at it from a network approach, which is going to trigger a larger consultant review study that the city has to be able to review and even accept or not accept.
Yeah, and I get because the local improvement is almost the antithesis of the Drainage Act, for instance. In a Drainage Act scenario, you have an area requiring drainage. So the folks that are the hardest hit by poor drainage are actually the ones that drive the ship when it comes to the Drainage Act process. That catchment area might be quite large, and the folks outside of the area requiring drainage might be far greater than the folks actually requiring drainage. But they're the ones that actually are able to dictate the process, and they end up carrying most of the cost. But the point is, they don't need a majority. A local improvement requires a majority. And the folks on high ground generally don't care where their water goes. And if their water all gets away, if you have a subdivision of 20 or 30 residents and the water all pools around 3 properties, you're never going to get a local improvement through because you have to get 66%. And if 66% of the folks don't have drainage issues because their water all gets away, I mean, not to be offensive, but they don't really care where the water goes as long as it gets away from their property. It's a situation where we have landfills. You put your garbage in a laneway, it disappears. Nobody really cares where it goes, even though it's in someone else's backyard in a landfill. So it's that same challenge, and that's why the local improvement process sometimes doesn't work because you can't get the 66% buy-in into that process. But I'm just explaining challenges essentially at this point. But so we've spent a lot of time talking about subdivisions and in developed areas, but the one-offs, like for instance, where I live, I don't have someone near me for half a kilometer. If I filled my ditch in, am I really impacting anyone? There's a lot of folks like that in the rural area who want to fill their ditch, and again, properly with a swale and a full culvert and a catch basin to catch the road. Because the key thing for the city is to make sure that we have road drainage. That's why the ditches are there. The ditches aren't there for private property runoff; they're there for road runoff. So in a case like that, did we look at any mechanism to provide a one-off in the case where there's no one around, or can you not do that because you're worried about there potentially being someone around in the future?
I would say that based on the review that we've done, Chair, through consultants review, is we've treated everyone consistently. So from an engineering perspective, we've been very consistent that it has to be a network review. In the isolated areas, I'm thinking more in the rural communities, large lots. I don't want to speak on behalf of Peter, but maybe he'll want to jump in here. I think that review would still need to be done. Obviously, it's probably less benefiting owners if it is, like you said, a farmer that may own the majority of the property that's being reviewed to be done. But I would say that based on the recommendations before the committee today, that network review would have to be, but that network can be very different, right? It really, and I think that's why we can't come out with a blanket statement to say, lot 1, 2, 3 on River Road is fine, but lots 3, 4, and 5 have to go through a network review. Just to be consistent in our approach to say that we have to make sure as a city, before we entertain that review, that proper assessment's been done. And that protects both the private homeowner as well as the municipality. Ultimately, as you know, these things all end up within the municipal right-of-way, which is owned by the city. And, there is a risk at the city to make sure that we're providing proper drainage for both private and public. And the infill policy, the ditch infill policy we're looking at today is just to make sure those mechanisms are looked at before residents contemplate trying to go ahead and do that work. So there's 2 before the committee today, so local improvement, or as if, like, for example, a private person decides that they want to front end that cost of that entire study to do just what you're saying, depending on what that drainage area looks like. It could be a very, reasonable project, I could say, or it could become a very large project. But without knowing each individual case by case, is very difficult to say and give a generic response to say that this one's okay and that one's not.
So you deal with a lot of development review applications, because I know that you often deal with the post-development drainage concerns. We have, I know, off of First Line Road, there's state lot developments in there as a part of Mgtt, but they're all, half of it was supposed to be open ditches, but the community came together and pushed the developer for closed ditches. Now, that's brand new. And in your experience, you've seen that even those brand new ones now will likely cause challenges in the future as that infrastructure erodes, and then the responsibility of it falls to the homeowner, correct?
That's correct. So, and I heard this asked, excuse me, a little bit earlier today, Chair, that if somebody puts in a private approach, which is the driveway access to their property, it's a legal private approach, sized the right way, there is a culvert being required to be installed as part of that private approach. The risk the city gets into is if they continue to extend that culvert along the frontage of their property, it most likely is exceeding the legal private approach, and it becomes, as we're trying to address in this policy, now an illegal ditch modification. You're actually piping that system. So then we get into those concerns we talked about earlier. Right now, it's very clear that a culvert under a private approach is a homeowner's responsibility, right? It's there to provide access to their property. If the culvert crosses a municipal roadway, absolutely, that's a city municipal maintained top to bottom. There's no question. When they start putting in, if you will, a pipe now to start covering their frontage of their property, we get into a lot of concerns. They're being done illegally. So then we're into an enforcement issue with the city. Some enforcement issues can take a long time to recover. If they're within a brand new development, now we also have the developer that's involved, and we're putting pressure on the developer to try and deal with these issues before the city will come in and give final acceptance to a subdivision. So they also get delayed. But of course, the risk there to the city is it wasn't reviewed in accordance with that overall stormwater management plan for the subdivision, right? So we don't know what that impact is. Who owns that pipe now? So the way that we've looked at it from the city is it's an illegal ditch infill. The city is not going to take it over. And then if we get pushed into a situation where the city is being told to now look after it, who to that point, who's maintaining it, right? Is it being cleaned? Are we videotaping it? Is it part of a maintenance package? So you're right, in the new developments, it might be okay for the first couple of years because those pipes are brand new. But you're right, if we get into 15, 20 years later, and there's huge erosion issues, and then there's a massive problem, then of course the municipality runs into a big problem and has to deal with that risk.
Okay, thanks. I only asked this question just to, because I think it helps show the complexity of the situation. I mean, we didn't even touch on common law drainage, which doesn't involve the city whatsoever, and it's just between two private property owners. So there's a lot to this, and I think I think in terms of what Councillor Kitts was speaking of, this is something I've been engaged on with staff for a long time, probably since December 1st, 2010, and I think it's something that would benefit other councillors engaged in that conversation, because we often don't consider. I think myself, I'm a rural councillor, I don't often consider Councillor Brockington or Councillor Aguilar's situation that they have subdivisions or developments that are almost identical to ones that I would have in the rural area. We often drive those lines, urban, suburban, rural. We don't realize how much cross-pollination there is between wards and impacts. The Glens could easily be North Core, to be fair. It's no, you're right, North Core is better. So we will I'll take Councillor Brockington's suggestion. No issue for me to pass this on to council without making a decision today, knowing that we might want to have something come forward to provide a bit more direction before we do so, so that we can continue this conversation on. I don't think staff have any concern with that. On the bright side, I won't be here next term to bug you about drainage anymore. Quentin, Brendan, Kevin. Thanks to that. So on referral then.
Carried.
Thank you. So in-camera items, none. Other business, none. Adjournment. We are adjourned. So ends the one and only joint meeting of Environment and Agricultural Affairs Committee. Thank you all, and we'll chat further. So if anyone wants to reach out, we can connect a bit more, Councillor Brockington and Councillor Kitts, on figuring out the best way forward as to how we can package it all together. Ideally in one motion, so we can put it all together succinctly and explain it to our council colleagues who did not have the pleasure of sitting in on this drainage discussion. All right, thank you all.
Thanks, Chair. Bye-bye.
Thank you.